visit to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Yasamin. So we have a new and exciting approach to getting input into the development of our implementation strategies. We have heard that there are many stakeholders and experts that have given considerable thought to the plans, programs, and pilots to begin implementing decarbonization in our region. So we want to gather these ideas. We want to learn from the knowledge out there in the community and in other parts of the country and around the world so that we can focus on action. The format of this workshop, where we have flipped the roles such that stakeholders present and the government listens, is a pilot of our own. So I hope that you will come along with us in this journey to explore new ways of public outreach. If this is successful, we would be building an online repository of ideas or an ideas bank with 5 to 7 minute presentations followed by questions from the moderator. Today, that will be me. First up, we have a presentation from Dr. Saeed Manshadi, who is an assistant professor at the San Diego State University's Department of Computer and Electrical Engineering, as well as the director of the Smart Grid Lab. He is also the co-director of SDSU's Southern California Energy Innovation Network. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Manshadi.
Thank you, Dr. Baksamusa. Very glad to be here this afternoon and share my thoughts on the developed regional decarbonization framework for the County of San Diego. So today I try to share academic perspective toward the plan and how we can go through decarbonization. If you could go to the next slide. This is the overall global situation for the CO2 emissions. And the good news is the current emission per capita for our county is already pretty much half of the average US per capita emissions, but still it's above the world average, and the projection is still in a concerning manner that we are going higher. So the whole thing is really necessary to avoid the future impacts that emissions would have on the carbon emissions for the environment. So we definitely need to address the issue. So if you go to the next slide. Out of all of these factors that we have, around 32%, this is 2021 data, is coming from electricity. It's electricity generation, the usage of electricity, and you can see transportation, agriculture, and industrial activities has its own impact. San Diego, we have a relatively, they call it in the electricity sector, low, not so heavy demand. So we are not so much industrialized. Many facilities here are office spaces and we have residential demand, but still, so the demographic is still slightly different from the, this is the global numbers that you see on the diagram here. But third of the problem for carbon emissions comes from the electricity. So that's why it's very important to try to address the problem on the electricity sector as the driver of the economy. If you could go to the next slide. So this is the overview of decarbonization that we can do on the electricity sector. We can divide that in two sides, the generation side and the demand side. On the generation side, we have solar as the leading factor. San Diego is one of the best places in terms of solar installation and energy availability in the world because of the good weather, sunshine around the clock, around the year, and that would be definitely a good potential. The question is that, are we going to go with a rooftop or utility scale, or we are going to import from neighboring county like Imperial County, or we are depending on a local buildup? So the problem with the solar rooftops is the hosting capacity of the distribution network. It's totally a problem that we are facing. So we definitely need to think about ways to empower the grid and modernize the grid to be available to provide that rooftop availability. On the utility scale, we have limitations. So as long as we can hear well the communities and we can go ahead and implement large projects for the utility scale, it seems to be an easier, lower hanging fruit for the solution. Wind, the calmness of the weather keep the offshore winds for San Diego as not so viable. So we cannot think of an offshore wind in San Diego County. We have some on our east side, but there are urban concerns and developments that would be taken into consideration. In addition to that, uncertainty that wind generation brings to the table would make it harder for the grid operators to handle the grid. The solution on another solution on the generation side would be the energy storage. So we can again think of a home energy storage and utility scale. For this side, it's kind of a flipped story compared to solar. So it's definitely better to have, according to the studies that I have done in our lab, and it is available in my Google Scholar webpage. You can dig up our research. The distributed storage across the distribution network is going to be overall a better solution compared to utility scale. It's not that utility scale is not good, but having too many home storage is going to be really good in terms of increasing the hosting capacity and increasing the rooftop solar. And the other resource that we can think of is the geothermals, which is mainly import from the Imperial County, thanks to the availability there. But still, we have the amazing transmission line that coming with the huge over 1,000 megawatt capacity. So the question is that, are we going to expand on that or not? The decarbonization is not limited to the generation side. On the demand side, we have there are research that are happening regarding the dynamic incentive program. Example of that is like Google Nest is trying to send some signal to customers who own the Nest. So the question is that, are we going to be carbon driven or price driven? So that's a question that should be answered. Time of use is there, that's helping, and it helps with the smart scheduling. Simple programs could be done to manage the load and easy to handle. The net energy metering is also another incentive for the demand side. There are challenges regarding the market cap for the retailers. I will talk about that, and that's return on investment for the consumers. And it would, there are arguments that would over the long run, it might have an adverse impact on those who are not owning a solar. That would be something that raise the economic justice issues. Another thing another emerging factor is the demand. On the demand side is the transportation electrification and how to charge up electric vehicles. A smarter scheduling of them could have a very good impact on mitigating, basically deferring the potential need for the electricity grid upgrades if we want to electrify everything. So I urge that it's going to be a huge challenge if we don't think about that properly. If we want to energize every single vehicle miles driven in 2020, we need to expand our power grid by 5-fold in California total. So that's I'm talking about every single vehicle miles traveled, 100% no more gas. So that's the extreme scenario. But if you're talking about the total decarbonization, that means we should prepare our grid very much. And of course, we have another concern on the customer side, which is the public safety regarding the public safety power shutoffs on the wildfire hazard areas. So this is the general picture, and I want to focus on a couple of these items for a further discussion regarding the decarbonization framework that we have here in San Diego County. If you could go to the next slide, please. So in the country report, there is a need for 200 megawatt clean power plants. So the question is that wind, solar, or other geothermal. I personally think solar would be a better solution given the availability that we have around the area. Utility scale solar would be something that just make more sense regarding handling the grid, regarding the economic justice and the grid upgrades that would need it to go beyond a certain threshold for the penetration of renewables would make it just hard for the solar rooftops to go beyond a certain number. There are, of course, concerns regarding local community, limited land availability, and third-party investments that would be required with the dropping PPA numbers, which recently there was a bump in the number, but overall the trend is downward. So the investment is becoming a challenge without enough subsidies. And then we have, maybe we can think of consumer-owned assets like hosting capacity limitations and equity in the access. As I mentioned, people would need to expect to receive the return on their investment, but the limitation on the grid might not be helping to go in that. So it's just not the case that you go ahead and put the solar on every single rooftop. You should have a grid who is responsible for that. Now that's a huge challenge, specifically for the areas that are having less complicated and more fragile grids. So the main problem, if you click on the figure, around 600 gigawatt hours of power was curtailed in months of April this 2020, and that's a California number. So this is how much solar and wind energy that you're losing due to the oversupply. What does oversupply means? It means it's not economical to use this. So we would see a phenomenon called negative local marginal pricing. So what's happening is that we are losing everyone. We are just curtailing the renewable. We just say we don't need it. So that's a huge challenge. So if you could go to the next slide. So this is the net energy metering, the textbook style. So we would sell during the day and buy in the afternoon. I think everybody would know that. I just want to have a reminder. If you could go to the next slide, I will tell you what's wrong with that. So the main issue with this net energy metering is that we are treating the grid as an ultimate magical storage. This raises two concerns, both on the consumer side and the utility provider side. The first one is that so I need to wrap up faster, but I'll try to wrap up real fast. So consumers are not happy because they are not necessarily, they're paying more in the afternoon and get back less during the day. And utilities, consumer choice providers need to purchase electricity from consumer at the price which is higher than the market prices. So this will call for a solution. And if you go to the next slide, I will show, so one solution that we're working on in academia in my lab, and this has been established research over the years, is to try to open up a fairly deregulated situation in which everybody get paid for what they provide, and the providers would basically go ahead and try to provide in a transactive environment. That would call for a justice, that would bring the prices lower, that will increase the social welfare maximization, and that's also something that would let every party involved to get advantage of what they offer. The only issue with that is how to facilitate that and how we can go ahead and take care of this in terms of implementation. That's the research that has been established. So if I can conclude in the next slide. So the path toward 100% decarbonization needs innovative solutions like a hierarchical market, which requires thoughts on the generation and the demand sides. We need to incentivize energy storage. That's the biggest elephant in the room that needs to be addressed. And managing oversupply is a really challenging task once we are talking about the path toward 100% decarbonization. And the net energy metering should be revisited if we are thinking about going beyond the current penetration of renewables. The current setup will not simply work with the entire 100% decarbonization that we have in mind. Thank you for the time, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Manchadi. That was a lot of material you covered in such a short time. I really appreciate it. And after you're done, you can put in the links to your labs in the chat so that people can follow up. But right now I have a few questions for you. First, I wanted to kind of take a deep breath here and understand the scale of the challenge ahead of us. With transportation electrification, you said we would need to fivefold our energy generating our need. And also you highlighted that we need to kind of make a choice in some cases about how much price driven and carbon driven we are. So with all this information, particularly given that San Diego is more office and residential energy focused, what would you highlight are some ideas or suggestions for action in decarbonizing the electric sector?
I think properly serving the incentivizing the installation of storage would be the best solution to go forward. It doesn't have to be a stationary storage. If we can develop technologies to use like electric vehicle batteries as a source for the grid services, that would be something that could work. I understand the challenge that people will not just simply feel comfortable connecting their car and get discharged. But that could be a thing that could pay back the investment on the electric vehicle, and also so basically save a bird with save a stone for two birds. So that's why it's going to happen. I think that's the best path forward, Gerald.
Thank you. And in your ideas labs and elsewhere, you kind of tried to explore the boundaries of our knowledge. And I wanted to ask you if there were examples of things that your lab is kind of working on that are not yet out in the field yet.
Yeah, we are working on some solutions to aggregate resources within the distribution network so they can be an asset for the grid. So think of a virtual power plant or under the grid. So, but the difference is we are empowering consumers with the availability to provide services to the grid. So that's an active research that we're currently working with. And if successful, that would be, and we have some partners in the region with that, that would be something transformational with this technology.
Thank you. We're looking for transformational approach. One last question about the, you said electricity sector drives our economy. And now you know that in our focus in the regional decarbonization framework is on regional collaboration. And in this sector, we have a host of stakeholders, businesses, labor, consumers, governments, tribes. So what potential role do you see the county playing in bringing everyone together to the table for regional action?
County can be the facilitator, that is, permitting, fast permitting, supporting the innovative projects, try to communicate with the communities if they have any concerns to make sure that the project that have good value to the county would go forward. I know that comes with some sacrifices, but I think public outreach and making sure that everybody feel like they heard and what they're providing, what they're bringing to the table is a fair share for this decarbonization framework. I think that's the best approach. So faster permitting, facilitate, everybody feels welcomed to come here and invest in renewable projects. I think that would be the best approach for the country. And I will respond to some question in the chat using the chat menu. I know we are over the time, so.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, Dr. Manchadi.
No worries.